One day, a 42-year-old adult comes along and says that while he was 10 years old, he had a perfectly consensual sexual relationship with a 30-year-old adult. The relationship was perfectly fine and consensual, and both of them enjoyed the sexual relationship.
Are you alright, mate? Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to The Right Opinion, the home of a twat with too much free time, and Amos Yee, someone who was under the radar for a while. Yes, this man is apparently quite notorious. I noticed a few people saying that he was an advocate for paedophilia, and I, being my naive self, at first assumed it was some sort of soft advocation, just the advocation of their existence or the legitimization or something like that, and oh my. Was I wrong? Yes, in a lovely video, quaintly named Paedophilia is Alright, he argues that not just paedophilia is alright, but the sexual encounters with children is fine, as long as they consent. Now, a lot of people have been speaking about the general morality of the issue, which I'll definitely integrate, but I also like to try and bring a different spin on my channel, so I'll be looking to integrate more pragmatic points as well. Let us get right into the video, because I just cannot wait to taste the spiciness of his points. He begins with a very pleasant anecdote in his preamble, in which he presents the story of a 42-year-old man who reveals that he had a healthy sexual relationship when he was a child with a 30-year-old adult. And it was alright, because he personally was not traumatized as a child at all. So it's all good, happy days, who cares about anyone else? We have one counterexample, and that's what matters. He then states that the treatment of paedophiles by society has been horrendous, saying that paedophilia is merely the attraction and not someone who is going to act on them, and following that statement by arguing that a paedophile should be allowed to act on those feelings anyway to a consenting child. So yeah, strange point. He also refers to paedophilia as a sexual orientation. It's not. In its most pragmatic terms, it's a preference, an inappropriate preference, but a preference nonetheless. If you're attracted to old people, for example, that's not an orientation. Let's get that clear. And once again, I cannot comment on the asserted solidified nature of paedophilia, but it is one of those things that is not right to be exposed to a child. Children are unique in that way. They're not the same as adults. They're old enough to understand, but they're young enough to still have it negatively influence their development. If you have a sexual attraction to children, so be it, but keep it to yourself, thanks. End of. I also don't appreciate that he's grouping paedophiles into the LGBT community. I'm putting my foot down here. Paedophilia is not a sexuality. Okay? Sexuality for me is what sexual organs you enjoy. Dick or vag, or both. Whatever floats your boat. Is that clear enough? He also carries on grouping paedophiles with genuine child molesters and asking why people believe they should be jailed. And once again, to clarify, you're only going to be jailed if you act on those urges. He also references statistics to do with suicide listed as 30 to 150, which is so incredibly broad that it's hardly verifiable, and he doesn't even reference it below. So that's pretty useless, isn't it? He also uses the classic, look at the terrible stigma these people are getting, so here's why we don't need age of consent. They're completely different and bizarre points, and the fact that he's trying to emote sympathy through telling people of these horrible stories of electroshock therapy, and then to go on and say, but sexual encounters with children are alright, must be intentionally missing the point. And I know that it's split into different parts, but this whole section seems like a red herring, and completely irrelevant to what he's trying to argue. And then he talks about child porn. Now, I could go off on anyone on this guy, explaining how children are too young to consent, which I think is almost ubiquitously understood. I think it's kind of amusing and worrying at the same time how genuinely morally black and white he sees the idea of child consent. It is pretty black and white, just the other way around. I like how outraged he seems at the idea of child porn being punishable by 15 to 30 years in prison. Even if you were an advocate on such a matter, surely you could understand why people find it distinctly wrong. Yee seems genuinely annoyed and confused that people are in favour of such a punitive measure. With regards to child pornography, Amos Yee completely disregards previous comments about consenting and complains that possession of it should not be prosecutable by law, but his outrage is once again completely false, not to mention he misses the problem with child pornography possession completely. It's not about exposure. If people believe that a child is too young to consent, then all child pornography is illegal, and active possession of such is also illegal, not to mention morally obscene. It's trickle-down criminality, as child pornography is a business in itself and there's no benefit of the doubt allowed with such. You cannot be possessing it because it is complicity in an illegal business. It's like owning a stolen car. It's not like watching footage of a robbery, because specifically the footage is also illegal. Is that understood? That is not the same as any other criminality. There is no moral equivalence. Then he talks about age of consent, and oh dear, no one's denying that there are some adolescents who are more mature than others, but the laws are in place because people have selected an age at which they have decided that children can have control of their own sexual prerogative. He argues for erasing the age of consent laws and then suggests that the idea of sending someone who has, quote, mutually beneficial sex with a 9-year-old to jail is insane. No, it's not. It's perfectly sane, my friend. You have to understand this. The line is drawn for reasons not just for individual comprehension. Children are precious in development, and if you know by now, any adult sexual assault case is a very complicated case indeed, and more often it will lead to moral grey areas where it's a plaintiff's word against a defendant's. Can you imagine the danger of that with children? The age of consent laws are there not to make exceptions for that reason. You say that if it causes emotional trauma, then a paedophile could be prosecuted, but how would you plan on measuring and proving that in a court of law where child sex is legal? It would just be like any rape case. But in this instance, children could suffer a lot fucking more. The damage and the implication is unthinkable. You haven't even began to consider this world that you wish to live in and the amount of disastrous outcomes that can take place. Where the fuck is your manifesto? There is no need for sex at a young age, and your proposed legislation would only help the sickest in society. And I don't need you to clarify in every video that you're not a paedophile. It kinda seems more suspicious when you feel the need to assert that. I'm sorry, I'm really having trouble finding the reasoning behind a lot of your assertions in this video, and especially a lot of the comparisons that you make. The use of one example doesn't deny the overwhelming examples to the contrary, and the laws are in place to protect children who aren't old enough to consent. With your ideas, you would only be greying the subject matter and facilitating illegal acts that would be much harder to drive consequences for. Morally and pragmatically, it's wrong. There's no excuse. Sort your shit out, mate. Please. Anyway, a bit of a longer video, spicier video I guess. I hope you enjoyed. It was certainly an interesting one. Any thoughts? Hopefully this one will be a bit more unanimous, but you never know. Either way, I'm intrigued to hear. Until then, I'm The Right Opinion, and I'll see you in the next one.